Man, I wish my theme song would just start playing because I command the world around me to play it, like I'm the center of my own universe. But I don't know. I've never tried it. Excuse me, theme song? Hey, what do you know? It actually works! The following is an in-depth story analysis. If you haven't seen this film, you might want to before watching this review. Today's review was requested by Chewbacca's lover, and he may have stumped me with this one. As I've said in the past, I don't like the term review-proof, because everything is, at least ostensibly, trying to accomplish something, and we can always judge it on how effectively it does whatever it sets out to do, assuming that it communicates its intentions to us. That's why something doesn't have to be for me in order for me to write a critical analysis. I've reviewed lots of movies on Superhero Rewind that aren't in my wheelhouse initially that I appreciated when taking them on their own terms. And some even won me over so much they changed my sensibilities to some degree, like The Crow. Ultra-violent revenge thrillers chock full of profanity don't appeal to me inherently, but when I realized that the elements that turned me off were necessary to tell that story, I realized that's a brilliant film. Same with RoboCop. I gave both of those a 4, and didn't really want to watch them initially. And of course, there are a lot of movies in this genre that aren't made for me. Part of the reason the superhero genre has taken off the way it has is because it's so versatile. You can tell any style of story with a superhero, but in other modes I don't usually gravitate toward have helped me to appreciate those kinds of stories more, particularly detective and noir stories, spy fiction, and horror. It's one of the things I've come to love most about doing this series. A lot of superhero movies use the same tired formula, but when you try to review them all, you discover that there's arguably at least one decent, if not great, example of every other major genre. But Rob Zombie's haunted world of El Superbeasto is a horse of a color I have never seen before in superhero movies. It's dozens of genres all rolled into one to create a unique tone that I must admit I've never quite experienced and will probably never forget. For better or worse. It made me incredibly uncomfortable, and I wanted to turn it off after the first 10 minutes. But being forced to give it a chance, I adjusted to it at least to some degree, and started to appreciate a lot of stuff about it. Some stuff that did feel like it was for me, even while at least 60% of it or more absolutely is not. I haven't seen a lot of zombie stuff, but from what little I have seen, like his Halloween remake and its sequel, I don't care for his general sensibilities. He is all about shock factor for its own sake, pushing boundaries without putting any real heart or humanity at the center of his stories, and challenging expectations at the expense of creating likable or believable characters, even if what he's making isn't a satire, a farce, or a melodrama. He's always struck me as a little mean-spirited, though I haven't seen a lot of his catalog, and that could change if I was exposed to more of his work. I don't know if that's fair. Though that would have to be involuntary exposure, because I'm really not compelled to subject myself to any more of his filmography after the few pieces I've sampled so far. However, his attitude and priorities are better suited to this project because it is satirical, melodramatic, and a complete farce. It's what Superfuzz needed to be in order to get away with some of the stuff that was attempting. One big joke that didn't even play it being a traditional narrative, with characters we're not expected to be invested in as real human beings. Its internal logic is that it has none. There is a story, but it's just an excuse to put ridiculous, out there, shocking, strange, and absurd images and situations on the screen, and to make fun of mainstream, stereotypical movie formula. The pacing of this movie is ADD. There's a joke every 10 seconds, and it constantly interrupts the story with a gag or a flashback or a song. It's really hard to sum up the kind of movie this is with a simple description, but I'll say it like this. It's like a XXX Adult Swim cartoon. It pushes everything, the sex, the violence, the language, further than Cartoon Network would ever dare to go. But I'm a little surprised by some of the lines it doesn't cross. There is full frontal nudity, but it never goes quite to an out-and-out pornography place, and it never animates certain features of the female anatomy I really expected it to. It seems content to hold the record for most bare breasts in an animated feature. I mean, I didn't look that up, but surely this holds that record. It's dripping with parodies of Hanna-Barbera and PBS cartoons, and there are a gazillion pop culture references to horror films and music and sitcoms and just about everything. I picked up on a lot of stuff, but I'm sure plenty went over my head. And while it gets self-indulgent, like Superbeasto running over a guy wearing a Michael Myers mask, probably an animated catharsis for Zombie after his experience with his Halloween films, I did enjoy a lot more of it than I thought I would. Because this is not for me. It was difficult not to look around and make sure nobody walked in on me watching this. I felt like I was visiting a website I wouldn't want in my search history. Thanks, stars, and I will admit to having seen most of this. Oh, I listened to all of it. I sat through the whole movie, but I couldn't help but look away in places. There's a prostate commercial Superbeasto is in that more than grossed me out, and there's some violence toward the end, especially with the fight between Susie X and Velvet Von Black, that made me cringe more than I have in a long time. And it was animated. There are probably some visual gags that made me gag that I've already blocked from my memory, too. Like Barbie in Princess Power, I could never have imagined I would have to tackle something like this when I embarked on this increasingly insane endeavor. That is, by the way, the only thing this has in common with Barbie and Princess Power, besides that they're both animated. Actually, you know what? That's not true. There's a scene in Princess Power where Super Sparkle and Dark Sparkle are both flying with a slanted line down the middle of the screen to separate the scenes. They're in competition, so they break the conceit and start slamming into the line like it's physically there, trying to knock each other out of frame. You know, that meta gag. This movie does that too. Susie X slaps Superbeasto through a separation line like that for thinking about sex too much. Yeah, I got a wholesome Barbie movie reference in a review for maybe the least wholesome movie I have ever seen. I feel accomplished. This movie came out the same year I started this series, 2009. If I had somehow been exposed to it then, I might have started coming up with more caveats for what I'll review in this series. Before I did so many, I was committed to every American and English language superhero film, regardless of content. I've always said I draw the line at pornography. This is as on the line for that as anything I have ever reviewed. It makes the Deadpool movies look restrained in their raunchy humor by comparison. Put this up against Kick-Ass, and that looks like a moderate PG-13. Speaking of Kick-Ass, I'm not going to do the same thing here I did with Kick-Ass 2. I'm not going to use profanity in this review and bleep it, because I don't want to repeat a gag. I want to try to hold on to at least a modicum of integrity, and because I would almost have to bleep basic descriptions of things going on in this movie, and you wouldn't have any idea what I was talking about, because even basic story points are so risque, profane, and mature. Or should I say, immature. When I said this movie may have stumped me, I mean both in trying to hold it to any kind of standard whatsoever, and in even trying to describe it in a Geekvolution video, without putting out an analysis that itself would sound rated X. I will get into the meat of this movie as much as I can bring myself to, but I'm gonna have to leave out more details than usual, because I'd have to be so cryptic in my descriptions you wouldn't even be able to tell what I was saying. This one would be a lot easier to talk about with pictures for context instead of the podcast format I'm using these days. But then again, I don't know how much of it I could even get away with showing you. There's a lot of nudity. There's a lot of sex. There's a lot of gross potty humor. And even the violence is sometimes so brutal, I'd be apprehensive about leaving one bloody shot on the screen for too long. Now you might be thinking, come on, Cap, just suck it up and say whatever words you need to thoroughly discuss this movie. That's the thing. But I'm happy to report that I'm not so desensitized that some of this is difficult for me to even relate to an audience. I'm sure most people haven't seen this film, and I'm going to try to take that into consideration as I talk about it. But usually I would provide a lot more linear synopsis because of that, like I did with Superfuzz, and I am really uncomfortable doing that with this. So I'm going to give you the broad strokes, and I'll use examples when I can to support my greater points. But if you really want a good sense of what this bizarre, intentionally depraved, intentionally offensive, ultra immature, and sexually deviant movie is like, you're just going to have to watch it yourself. And I don't recommend that for everybody. If you like grindhouse movies, and/or South Park, and/or Splatterhouse horror, you may be more at home here than I was. Although I'm not saying that any one of those things will necessarily prepare you for this. But if you don't want to see animated women who are almost always topless, chauvinist men whose only goal in life is to have as much sex with women as they can, a diminutive, nerdy supervillain in a Speedo, and a stripper who can blow up her own breasts like they're balloons, stay far away. There are, believe it or not, quite a few really clever references and homages to horror movies and every kind of animation there is, and genuinely witty turns of phrase and banter. There are some hilariously absurd ideas here, like an army of Nazi zombies that come out of the ground to be reunited with Hitler's preserved head, but there may not be enough of that to make it worth wading through all the crass stuff. I don't think there was enough of that for me to watch it a second time even, but I'll admit I did find quite a bit here amusing, and was surprised to actually laugh out loud uncontrollably at a couple scenes while watching this movie all by myself. There's not a lot of real story analysis to do here, because these aren't supposed to be relatable or even likable characters we're invested in. They're base, sometimes vile archetypes in a melodrama about a world where killing is fine, having sex with whatever moves is fine, even if it's not consensual, and rape is nearly a non-issue because if someone thinks they're attractive, of course, everyone is trying to sleep with them any way they can. Don't shoot the messenger, folks. I'm just reporting what I watched. There aren't even characters as endearing as the most heroic characters in Sin City, like Marv and Hardigan. These people don't have redeeming qualities, except maybe Susie X a little bit, who legitimately is a hero who stops hordes of Nazi zombies and wants to be a strong, independent woman who isn't put into a box, as her introduction song goes. But she also brutally eviscerates bad guys and even the non-zombie kind. So this is the story, such as it is. Strap in, folks. El Superbeasto is a jack-of-all-trades in his mind type, a washed-out actor, director, luchador wrestler who is still his own biggest fan and pretends like he's the biggest star on the planet, even though his agent can't find him real work and he has to resort to making porn films, which he pretends are real movies. Really gross and bizarre fetish movies, like the Italian restaurant movie he makes at the beginning, where he pours spaghetti sauce over a naked woman, totally taking advantage of an actress who had no idea that was going to happen to her. Because burning naked women against their consent is apparently hilarious. And trust me, that is tame and mentionable in a way other things are not. Superbeasto barely qualifies as a superhero, just in the sense that the whole world revolves around him, regardless of his pathetic status. His theme song starts when he calls for it. The universe always ultimately fixes every problem for him, without his having to do much of anything, and very occasionally we see a cameraman or a DJ with a sound system to suggest that we're actually watching a fourth-wall-breaking movie Superbeasto is making about himself, in a world where he's making movies he's starring in. So I guess in the real world, air quotes, where they're making this movie, he must have a better career. But I'm already reading too much into this. No reason to dwell on the logic of it, the movie certainly doesn't. And again, there's enough completely impossible, non-sequitur humor that I would put this in the Naked Gun category. It doesn't make sense, and it doesn't want to. I would have left the fourth wall breaking stuff out though, because it's few and far between, and it doesn't seem to be parroting movies that do that really, so much as just doing it like it's inherently funny, which it isn't. I don't think so anyway. Humor is subjective, and reviewing a farce like this is hard, because if it's playing fair with the audience about what it is, which honestly this is, then it lives and dies based on whether it's funny. More on that later. So Superbeasto isn't a real hero. He's only about himself and banging chicks and looking cool. He's like Johnny Bravo if he were allowed to do all the perverted stuff he can't get away with on Cartoon Network. He teams up with Susie X, his sidekick sister, who is more competent and kind of the real hero of the piece, and they go up against Dr. Satan, who is really Stephen Wachowski, the nerdy kid who horned in on Susie Z in high school and who Beasto, his bully, beat up constantly. Wachowski has reinvented himself as a supervillain, Dr. Satan. I would imagine this is a stab at Larry Wachowski, now Lily Wachowski, who famously transitioned into a woman the year before this movie came out. Dr. Satan refuses to be referred to by his former name and is desperate to transform into another form himself. He's looking for a fabled woman with the mark of the beast, and he finds her in a stripper named Velvet Von Black. voiced by the often very funny, but insanely vulgar Rosario Dawson of all people. She's so comfortable with her body, she doesn't mind being fondled or groped, because this is a real male wish fulfillment fantasy kind of movie. And she's almost offended when men and even the ape Dr. Satan sends to kidnap her don't do that. There's a lot of, "What are you, a queer?" kind of dialogue in this movie. If all this sounds really offensive, that's because it is. I guess being intentionally offensive is how Zombie gets his kicks. And one of the things that's supposed to be funny about Von Black is that she's a white woman voiced by a black woman with the word black in her name. At one point, after Otto the intelligent ape accidentally pleasures her in a bathtub, yeah, that happens, she says, "Once you go black, you don't go back." Von Black. So if Dr. Satan marries her, he'll turn into a real big imposing devil and have all the powers of hell, so he can feel strong and get to be the bully our supposed hero was to him in high school. It's your typical hero creates the villain situation, but turned on its head. Our hero is really a horrible person, doesn't realize it, and never takes responsibility for the villain who wouldn't exist if he hadn't been such a mean kid in school. And here comes the thematic analysis. Don't worry, this won't take long. It's all about measuring sizes. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. He's El Superbeasto because he's a beast in multiple senses. Sexually accomplished, a wrestler, and a killer, all of which he seems to have been raised to do by his wrestling parents who found him on their doorstep as a child. All the origin stuff is given to us in song for every major character, which is kind of fun. Dr. Satan wants to be like him, a beast in every sense, and his ultimate goal is to conquer the world like King Kong and take Susie X as his consort. He has no real interest in the stripper, Von Black, who is just the MacGuffin to get what he wants, and the feeling is mutual for her. Von Black actually doesn't mind getting kidnapped as long as she gets 50% of all of Dr. Satan's assets when they get married. She's the ultimate opportunist, always fine with whatever someone else wants from her as long as she sees it as an even trade. Obviously, I could do without the bestiality. There's a sentence I never thought I'd write. And yeah, it goes all the way there in her final scene with the ape. Gotta get the literal meaning of beast in there too, I guess. But the cordial kidnapping idea is kind of funny, where the ape gives her a bubble bath and she's treated like a queen, and likes being kidnapped until just before the wedding when she realizes Dr. Satan is going to be hard to get along with. And then immediately wants a divorce when the giant monster version of Satan picks up Susie X and runs off with her. And ultimately, there's a cat fight. Movie's words, not mine, between Susie X and Von Black, just because one calls the other a hoe or something. Because of course there is. You see, insanely bloody cat fights are inherently funny, as are gold-digging women. It's just a universal constant. Ha. At the end, Superbeasto wins with a plot device, a cat that changes Dr. Satan back into Wachowski, and he beats him into vicious submission. He doesn't do very much at all until then, besides have a lot of sex, show up where the story needs him to be, and get thrown in a dungeon for a while. I don't want to talk about the thing with the dungeon and the rats, so I won't. At the end, everybody gets laid, of course, including Von Black, who turns sophisticated and non-sexual Otto back into a mindless ape so he'll sleep with her, because he has a screw on his head you can turn that makes him smart or stupid. And Susie X has sex with her sexually frustrated robot, Murray, who wants to have sex with her the whole movie because he's programmed that way, but she either doesn't notice or is teasing him the whole time, at one point stripping in front of him to change her clothes randomly, and then she rewards him with kinky bondage sex at the end for no real reason. And that is what I had to subject myself to, folks. That's as toned down a synopsis as I can give you. Oh, if only this film had stayed solely in the pulp EC Comics vein it is majoritively living in, and not had its villain call Susie X and her horny robot pals superheroes, I wouldn't have to review this. Because yeah, it's using the basic superhero movie structure, and a lot of the tropes are here. Orphan who grows up and becomes a masked vigilante, though this one is masked his whole life, which is kind of funny. Hero who creates the villain, damsel in distress that gets kidnapped, hero who has to fight a big monster version of the bad guy at the end, and it's turning a lot of those things on their heads and making fun of the played-out formula. But it's much more interested in horror movie references and that tone. The opening credits are straight out of a black and white monster movie, which is authentic and fun and the style I kind of expected the whole movie to be in. And we see a cameo from practically every monster and slasher I can think of, including Michael, Freddy, Jason, so all my kids, For anyone who doesn't know, my kids all have horror movie names. It's a long story. Frankenstein, the bride of Frankenstein, who is extremely horny and topless like every other woman in this movie. The Loch Ness Monster, who... Okay, you know what? I'm tired of repeating myself. Everyone is getting laid in this movie. Constantly. Okay? That's the movie. Cartoon parody, horror parody, superhero structure, women who can't keep their shirts on, and men who can't keep it in their pants. Should have just used that as the synopsis and saved us all a lot of time and agony. I don't know if Rob Zombie is just trying to get a rise out of people with whatever offensive and disgusting thing comes to his mind, or if this is his thinly veiled way to express womanizing and homophobic tendencies. I wouldn't presume to judge the man. I don't know. But I think he made the movie for a one-person audience. Himself. Skirting that fine line between making something you like and hoping there are enough people out there like you, and making something you have to be you to enjoy. The maddening thing is, there's a surprising amount of stuff here I did honestly think was funny. Like a lot of the music and some silly exchanges. Like there's a scene where Susie X is arguing with the disembodied head leader of the Nazi zombies about whether it's the second coming of the Third Reich or the first coming of the Fourth Reich. That's some classic Monty Python level stuff, and I ate that up with a spoon. I also really like the gag with the domino rally set that gets set off to call in zombie reinforcements after Susie X steals Hitler's head. That one struck me as a classic Matt Groening gag. So yeah, apparently I just like all the stuff with the Nazi zombies. The reason the movie feels somewhat impenetrable, oh great, now everything I write is going to sound like sexual innuendo, is because Zombie is keenly aware of how tasteless and gratuitous this material is, and he covers all his bases to make sure you know he gets how most people will react and how much he doesn't care. The fact that a movie acknowledges something it knows will bother people doesn't make it a good idea, but I can't help but appreciate the audacity and unabashedness to some degree. It's really easy to call this movie sexist, but the question is, if he's trying to offend people because he thinks maybe that's funny, is that a problem? There's a lot of self-deprecation in the film, like a really funny song toward the end where Superbeasto does the most obvious and cliche thing possible to bully his arch-nemesis, still playing the high school bully to Dr. Satan's outcast nerd. He drops a bucket of blood on his head as he's standing at the altar of unholy matrimony. The song is a ballad that goes, "This scene is so familiar. Ooh, why'd you have to rip off Carrie? Since the movie started, this part is the most retarded. With the sound effect and the split screen thing, did you ask De Palma or Stephen King?" And it's pretty catchy, too, like all the music in this movie. There are several examples of the film rolling its eyes at itself for all the cheap eye candy and unnecessary language, all the vulgar stuff it does just to get a rise out of the audience, like the elderly bellhop who, after a couple scenes of awkward small talk with Dr. Satan's ape henchman, Otto, shows up again during the credits to say he doesn't care for all the potty humor, and he says, instead of a punchline, they just flash some, breasts. I mean, that's not the line verbatim. But then, to drive home its lack of shame, and to say, yes, this is maybe the most lowbrow trash you've ever seen, but it's my trash, and I like it, Rob Zombie has the bellhop strip off the old man body, revealing that it's a costume. And underneath is yet another large-chested, topless bimbo. Kinda sums up the whole movie, really. Zombie demonstrates such a keen understanding of the cliches and tropes and formulas of superhero and horror movies by intentionally throwing in all the lazy staples satirically, and his script is sharp-witted enough, I'd go as far as to say that he could probably write a decent original movie in one of those genres and play it straight if he really wanted to. But I don't know, he'd probably get bored. I get the sense that while he's clearly a smart filmmaker who knows to some degree what he's doing, he really wants to use the medium as an excuse to revel in things that aren't usually socially acceptable. That's his main driving force. But he tries to make his movie more palatable by warning the audience with the creepy black and white vaudeville host in front of the curtain at the beginning who says, "Mr. Rob Zombie would like me to give you this friendly word of warning." He says that if you don't have a strong constitution, you might want to leave. And he ends the disclaimer with, "If any of you feel you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now's your chance to, well, we warned you." At first, the movie poking fun at itself and qualifying the shock factor feels like a cop-out. Like, as long as we always put neon lights around the obvious or gratuitous things we're doing, we'll always get away with it. But by the end, that actually made it more tolerable for me, because it is a parody of poorly written movies and cartoons, of all kinds really, made as a poorly written movie. except there's a lot of genuinely creative jokes and ideas, and there's a lot of effort put into it. And that makes it hard to just write off. It reminds me a little of the angry video game nerd Video Game, which parodies unfairly hard games in an unfairly hard game. But because that's its purpose, and because it looks and sounds great instead of a thrown-together project that doesn't care it sucks, like a lot of what AVG and reviews, it's easy to enjoy it on its own terms, to have fun being trolled by it. When I play that game, I'm laughing with it, and having fun trying to make the ridiculously hard mechanics work for me. The rules are broken for a satirical reason, and it's self-aware. The satire that game is trying to achieve only works if it's so frustrating. Like that, this is a real passion project, it feels like, and you can see the skill and the commitment behind the work. It's even, dare I say, a little innovative at times, particularly in its animation and storyboarding. Part of the joke is to see something this lowbrow and disgusting made with impeccable production values. It looks fantastic. It's vibrant, it's stylish, it nails all the properties it's poking fun at, like the Schoolhouse Rock sequence with a song that's a how-to video, like How a Bill Becomes a Law, that lists all the steps to getting a girl with 666 branded on her behind and marrying her so you can become a giant devil monster and get all the, quote, sudsy powers of hell. All the music is really well written and authentic, even if the lyrics are gross or wrong. My favorite thing in the movie is the Scooby-Doo-like song that plays when Susie X fights the Nazi zombies. She's riding her robot-turned-motorcycle in a street chase, who has redesigned himself so that he can squeeze her behind as they're driving. Ha ha ha. And this is all a parody of Wacky Races. The song describes every single thing that's happening on screen, and I kinda lost it at that. It took me by surprise when it comes back later, really briefly, when the Nazi zombies are standing at a gate, singing about how the Nazi zombies are standing at a gate. Man, just give them a movie. I suppose everything I dislike about this is a matter of taste. Yes, there are wild inconveniences in the plot. Yes, it constantly interrupts itself for big, unimportant, jokey scenes. Like a really long, uncomfortable one with Dr. Satan masturbating before his henchman walks in on him to tell him if he successfully kidnapped Von Black, and then we can get back to the story. And the whole thing is resolved with a blatant Deus Ex Machina, a satanic book that one of Superbeasto's luchador brethren had the whole time, but doesn't mention it till it's time for the movie to end, which gives Beasto the antidote to change Dr. Satan back into Stephen Wachowski. Like I said, a cat. Of course it's a cat. Remember what John Constantine said, they're half in, half out anyway. But again, it's a complete farce, and it's great at communicating its opening contract with the audience. The movie is going to be gross and stupid, and it's going to be filled with childish humor. This is not to be taken seriously. It's not about the story, really. That's there to have something to carry us through all the jokes. But it never loses sight of what story there is. It intentionally gets us from point A to B in stupid and sometimes hilarious ways, but it never gets boring, and there's usually some kind of forward momentum. It always gets back on track, even if I don't like what we're doing on or off the track. The Haunted World of El Superbeasto does what it sets out to do pretty well. It checks off my first two boxes. What is it doing, and is it accomplishing that? But then the question is what it's doing worthwhile? I don't know. I'm stumped. I'm okay with self-aware trash, but this one is trying really hard not to look too mean-spirited, and I'm not sure where it ultimately lands. At the end of the day, I don't think I like this movie, but there are a lot of really smart jokes that I loved, and it's extremely well made. So I'm going to give it a safe, straight down the middle, 2 out of 4. Well, if you couldn't tell, folks, this is one of the harder reviews for me to write, and I feel like I need to go take a shower. So while I'm doing that, if you're interested in supporting the channel, you can go to patreon.com/Geekvolution, and for just $2 a month, you can get early access to regular episodes of Superhero Rewind, as well as access to Geekvolution After Dark, my and Eric's uncensored talk show that we do twice monthly. At the $10 tier, you can become a Patreon producer, and I'd like to say thanks to all of our producers right now, including David Harpstrite, Dylan Muschiello, Nick Manna, Eamon Singleton, Cletus Winslow, Remy LeBlanc, Derek Jacob, The Day Ghost, Michael Gulick, Magpie's Nest Productions, Kareem Roberts, Lot 10 Underground, Michael Mark Micheletti, Carl Maxey, Dimitri J., John Johnson, Jacob Schneider, Nathan Handford, Aram Zangana, Joey Crouch, Sartaj, Govind, Singh, Ethan, Gui D, Caleb, Malik Myers, Lone Wolf Jedi of Gotham, Chewbacca's lover, David Crabtree, Simeon Scott, Justin Hayes, Marie Flowers, Clark Whitfield, Ian McKee, and Jeffrey Patrone. I'm getting closer and closer to having this list memorized. Make yourself a part of it by going once again to patreon.com/Geekvolution, and also at the $50 tier, you can request a review on Superhero Rewind or Science Fiction Rewind, either one time or even regularly if you're so inclined, and I will add them to the queue as we go along. Folks, we have just 2 more left. I'm excited to show them to you. I really hope you've enjoyed this series. I am Captain Logan, and I'll see you again tomorrow.